Hello, all right. Today we're doing our first installment of what we're calling Talking NES and History, and this is Critical Play. We're technically CSULB, the Center for the History of Video Games and Critical Play out of Cal State Long Beach. We've been doing this for about 2.5 years, the fall of 2018, where we have an archive of games and consoles and equipment that's we call a playable archive. So we collect and we have these available for our students in the community to play. We also do a lot of writing and discussing of history of video games and analysis and representation of video games. We have classes on this too. We currently have 2 classes, and we're developing a 3rd class about the history of technology in video games at Cal State Long Beach. And if you're interested in any of those things, please let us know. We also take, as our archive is expanding, we just acquired an Apple IIe with a bunch of games. We also take donations. Or if you have anything interesting you'd like to share, you can see our information on the screen here, where to email us or contact us if you would like to donate or share something with us. So we're just starting this series where we're investigating specific games from the NES library that deal with historical topics. We look at history broadly in video games, but here we're looking at specific references of history in video games. We also have a series called Historians React, where we have historians, and whether specialists in their field, play or talk through the history in video games. We've done Assassin's Creed, we've done We the Revolution, which deals with the French Revolution, we've done Town of Light, a number of different games where we have a critical discussion of how history is used and discussed and portrayed within video games. And here's a little different. We're obviously looking at a different period in 8-bit history of the NES. And today, with our series Talking NES and History, we're going to be looking at Commando.
1985 Capcom game. That was as close to a launch title as I think you could have gotten with this one. It's not in the list of launch titles, oddly enough, but it came out in November of 1986. The NES was, by that time, in I think all of the markets across North America, and just having been launched in Europe at that point in time. So if this isn't a launch title, it's right at the very beginning of it. So cool game. Well, cool game is relative, I suppose.
There's a lot to say about this. Sean and I have been going back and forth about how to discuss this. There's a lot of points and thinking about the game and where it fits in terms of how history is being used in the cultural and historical context of the game, which is something that we're mostly interested in. Looking at the game, and playing the game, it's actually, well, I think Sean meant it's fun.
It is fun, yeah.
So the gameplay for Commando is, it's a top-down scroller. As Sean mentioned, it's fun. It's a run and gun, where you are just a single individual taking on, all the enemies. With the cover of the cartridge or the game says, defeat all the enemy, right?
Right.
And it comes in a 1-player, 2-player version. I think we both only played the 1-player version because we're isolated. We are playing this on emulators. All our other NESs are in our archive. And Sean has played a little bit more than I have. We both played it quite a bit, but what was the feel of the game for you?
I played for about an hour yesterday, and I played without the cheat codes for the first bit of that, and it is as a top-down scroller, and I think and it plays very much like the arcade port that it is. This comes from an earlier arcade game that was a notorious quarter eater that you would just shovel money into to play, and so the gameplay itself still plays like that kind of top-down arcade shooter where it just throws enemies at you relentlessly. Because of that, I sat with it for probably 20 minutes, and the farthest I've gotten on a run is to stage 1-3. Right, and the game is broken up into, each stage is broken up into 4 levels, and there's a total of 12 stages to get to the end. 1-3 was as far as I could get without putting in the cheat codes. As soon as I put in the cheat code, right, where no bullet would touch me, then I could fly through the game, and it's no fun that way, but you get to see the game.
The end of each stage it's like a boss battle, but it's not a boss battle. It's basically them throwing enemies at you,
right,
with a couple higher powered individuals, and it's intriguing in that you want to keep going, and it's difficult, and you could easily see how this becomes a quarter eater. But it's still engaging, especially I think when you start finding, and we found the map to this later, all the secret rooms, right? The underground bunkers.
Yeah, I go back and forth on it, right? I mean, in some ways, that one-hit death is frustrating, right? Because it just wipes you out. The game does give you the opportunity to play on continuous, so you can continue after you've lost all 3 of your initial players in the same spot that you
it's like
left
a save
off.
Point
it kind of gives you a half save point. If you play on the more traditional style, there are no save points, and it just drops you right back to the very beginning of whatever stage you were on. And I don't know, that to me can become a little bit frustrating. It feels, I don't know, it doesn't push the narrative as much as there is a narrative in this game forward, right? And you as a kid playing this, I'm not really a kid, as a teenager playing this, right? This would have been one of those frustrating throw your controller down moments and probably give up and not finish.
Maybe I would have probably finished, but I think for a couple of reasons. It's not like modern games where your health meter drains. You get, like a lot of these, you get hit once, you're dead. Like that's typical of this era, though you have several lives, 3 or 4 lives, whatever it is, with a chance of gaining a new life at 10,000 points and every 50,000 points. And you can get bigger guns. If you start going into the underground bunkers, you have 3 types of bunkers. One where you find more powerful weapons, one where you can release POWs. POWs gain you points, which helps you get to a free life, and then some that are just filled with snakes or other enemies. So you don't always, unless you get the map, the cheat code essentially, then you're going down the bunkers, and anything can happen, but they can really benefit you. And it would be a kind of game where it's, I think in my year when I was playing it last week I got to a point, maybe on 1.3, 1.4, where it's just, I just kept hitting the same problem.
Hit the same wall.
I couldn't,
right?
I just couldn't dodge enough bullets, or I was just, whatever. But
no, because it becomes they throw a lot of enemies at you as you advance, even in the first stage. And then when you get to the end of that stage, the whole thing just kind of repeats itself again. It's the same map over again, but the hidden areas are moved a little bit, and to find those hidden areas you actually have to hit them with a grenade, right? So to open up the ladders to get down into the bunker, you have to hit them with a grenade, which also, again, without a strategy guide, without a map, would have been a frustrating moment in, right, where for me and the kind of patience I have for a game like this, it is literally just run and gun and
Yeah, you go
don't look
straight
back.
ahead.
I just go straight
You
ahead. Yeah,
you don't do the swivel and spray that was
no
promoted in one of the early
yeah,
NES guides to
guides.
winning the
Yeah,
game.
I like. Yeah, and that guidebook was called like How to Win at Nintendo.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
I think
Um,
it is published 87, 88,
yeah.
something like that.
So yeah, for me, it's a fun game. It's I mean we can. Do you want me to play a little bit here and see
We can
what?
have a little play. It's
Might have
it,
to reset my. Sorry, put that down. I'm gonna flip over to the
and
stream.
the game, it got good reviews from from several different magazines.
It
Um,
did. All right,
un,
so I'm playing now. The helicopter is about to drop me off. We'll
uh,
see how far I can get on this. Just one little
a lot of helicopters in these
moment.
types of
Yes.
games because you are
So,
the lone individual to save others. You are the commando.
I've
Um,
already died. So, first death.
and what is the positive review? One said, from the moment the helicopter deposits Super Joe in the heart of enemy territory, Capcom's greatest creation delivers relentless fire and movement action. Few cartridges can equal its non-stop action.
Yeah.
Made it popular. But I think as Sean has mentioned, if you like completion, maybe this is probably not. I'd like to see how people completed it at this age and what high scores were, but
Right.
I mean, it's not Dark Souls difficult,
No,
but
and it's
at times it feels, it's just a bit relentless.
yeah. This
But
I'm in a section here where they're just starting to throw. I'm almost to the top of the level here. I mean, the nice thing is you can just avoid bullets, run past them, avoid
not
them.
the fastest bullets.
Save a couple of guys, and then just try to avoid the best you can until you get to the boss stage.
Yeah.
The boss stage is, if I can get up there, I've only got one guy left. Here we go. This is a boss stage here. And all I have to, I died. What you have to do is clear
All you have
the
to
realm.
do.
Yeah, let's see if I can do this.
The problem is you were playing with cheat codes yesterday.
Yesterday, exactly.
And with
And
this
now I'm
particular
not.
cheat codes, the bullets go right through you.
And that is game over, so I'll switch back out.
So our interest in this is obviously finding games that are fun, but we're looking at historical games, and this being one in an early port made in 1985 and ported to the NES right away. There are earlier historical ports, a few of them, Wild Gunman, but that uses a light gun. So this is one of the earliest that we've seen or found is the way that historical ideas and the culture of the times was influencing the representation of history within
Right.
these games, right? And this particular game, you have this kind of ambiguous setting of where you are. Like on one screen, there's trees. On another screen, there's
It's
lakes. On another, there's streets and
Right. It's
buildings.
like a nondescript military base, a semi-tropical deserty.
Yeah.
Right, I'd written in my notes as I was playing it. Is this the South Pacific? Is this Vietnam? Is it, where are we supposed to be? The box art alludes to World War II, I think, and wants it. I think it wants
It's ambiguous.
the game to be in World War II. I mean, Jeff is sitting in front of a piece of the box art there, right, and there his sleeves are rolled up. The commando, he's got that kind of '80s commando look.
Yeah.
But and that helicopter feels almost like a Huey, so it feels like it's
It,
referencing Vietnam.
yeah, that's what I get there, and it's saying the two things, the sleeveless sort of idea of the commando, the
Right.
terminology of the game,
Right. I mean,
it
we could spend an hour just talking
on that
about the etymology of
to
Commando
commando,
and where
right?
it came from.
Yeah,
Right from the Boer War and the Afrikaans fighting against South African rebels, or I guess we flipped that.
but I mean, it being in the 80s, and we've
Right.
discussed this too. It's the implications and the terms are allusional to sort of anti-communist efforts, whether in Vietnam, Central America,
Right.
South America, right? The lone commando, military advisor, whomever, doing what they need to rescue whomever. And I suppose
Right.
that's another ambiguous moment. Your POWs or rescuing someone is often part of the theme, and that's it here. You don't have to rescue the POWs, but it is definitely worth your while to rescue the POWs
Right. Yeah. I mean,
in
you
this
can play
game.
this whole game without going underground,
Yeah,
and
and
finish
there's
it.
POWs above
Right.
ground, but
Yeah, you do
um,
rescue. I rescued a couple on right. You can rescue, but you don't have to go into the bunkers. I mean, that's kind of
no,
one of the weird things about the way this game plays is there's two games, right? There's the game on the surface where you can just
yeah,
basically run, push through, and you don't get any sense of urgency or of need to save your comrades, right? It really is just about a kind of racking up points, and in that
yeah.
way, right? I think
I get
the narrative about war in some ways gets lost, but the imagination, or at least, that's kind of what I like about games of this generation, of the 8-bit generation, and even earlier the Atari game, the 2600 games, right? And there is a port for this on the 2600, which
yeah,
is even worse in terms
terrible.
of graphics than this. Although this is actually a pretty
This is pretty
good
good.
port. But you, the player has to imagine the story, right? The player tells the story. The player um, brings their knowledge of the world around them into these worlds. I think, maybe,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I think I think that's happening always, but here there's not a lot of literal narrative given
no,
to you. Yet the construction of the narrative then comes directly from gameplay, but also the imagery. Like you and this is where I feel it's more Vietnamish, and maybe that's it doesn't here neither here nor there, but I think it plays into the idea of using themes of commando and the
mm,
militaristic nature in the films that emerge in this era. Like
right,
you talked about Rambo and Chuck Norris films, is you get dropped in the world with palm trees, and then another level 2 or 1.4, maybe I can't remember. There's these huts. There are these essentially thatched huts, and you can go into them and go underground. You get
mm-hmm.
this sense that it's
It's
making these references
right, making references
to
to Vietnam
to
tunneling and
Vietnam
the Viet Cong
tunneling.
tunneling,
Yeah, and
yeah,
you can't go in all the huts, but you can go in some of them, and there's
right,
snakes down in some of them, and that's where I felt it's a bit ambiguous in which war, and I think that plays to it. Like it can be any war, but at the
right,
same time, the coded messages, particularly with the terminology of commando, which is written and used more in the 80s in American literature, even though this is a Japanese game.
right,
Um, they're very aware they're selling to an American market, right?
right. No, for sure, and
Famicom is bringing over NES, and they're going to sell these games.
right.
Um,
And when we look at the pop culture of the time, right, we've got the obvious connections to the Vietnam War, that of that moment, right? And like Jeff was just saying, you've got Rambo 2, I
Invasion
guess Rambo
USA,
3, Invasion
Delta
USA,
Force.
Delta Force, yeah, Missing in Action, all of
Yeah,
these kinds of rescue the POW from Vietnam with that singular muscular
yeah,
hero who's going to kind of go his own way, screw the government and rescue the men that were left behind by this inept bureaucracy that had lost us the war. And I think in the 80s we were kind of coming to terms with the war and what it meant for us. And there's that kind of weird moment, that kind of cultural moment where in filmic history, you've got things like the Green Berets, comes out in the 1960s. Cimino, when he's making that film, is he's forced to make changes to it because he's filming right in the middle of 1968. The tenor of support for the war is changing to have this very celebratory film, right, that is essentially a Western in South Vietnam, right, with a Ford Apache, right, to have that as a kind of, it wasn't going to play well to audiences, so they tacked on this weird spy fiction thing to the end of that film, lengthening it, but kind of changing the tenor of it, right? And then by 72, you start to see a different kind of film come out, right?
It's that transition. You have the Sands of Iwo Jima earlier, where John Wayne again is the final scenes. He's shot in the back, right? But the only way, the enemy is nefarious. You don't even have to see them, but they kill them. And then this is much different. The Green Berets, right? And I didn't want to cut you off, but you start seeing the films, Deer Hunter and other things in the 70s that are questioning these things. But then I don't want to go too quick here. Full Metal Jacket, what have you, but the idea of this cowboy, this lone individual, also plays into the political environment of the time with Reagan, the cowboy president, the second sort of, if you look at a cowboy president from Roosevelt to Reagan, and later sort of Bush is imagined these cowboy presidents who plays on those things, who played a cowboy, who talks about individualism, who talks about, it's morning in America, right? He was very anti-communist, who has a history of strong anti-communist, who has a history of many other things.
Right.
But
and who wants
larger...
and who in both political culture and I think in pop culture wants to kind of re-prosecute that war, right? And re-mythologize it and come to a different way of understanding that war and its meaning, right? Where, and it's almost, and I kind of like that, right? It's almost a return full circle back to the original intent of the Green Berets film, right? The original intent was to be a kind of during the war propaganda film that supported the troops and was a kind of imperialistic rah go American exceptionalism, right? That's what Cimino set out to make with the Green Berets, but because of the situation in '68 when the film was being made, he had to pull back and change the tenor of the film. Then we get the 1970s films, right? We get Coming Home, Deer Hunter, and Apocalypse Now. We get Full Metal Jacket, Platoon, Born on the 4th of July, right? These are our reckoning moments with Vietnam, kind of thinking about the way that in some ways this personalizes the war, right? And the soldier becomes kind of the key to understanding our war. So it's what the war does to the soldier and what the war does to our veterans as they're coming home. And then by then
those movies are also about groups of soldiers, right? They're individuals, but they are a part of a small community,
right?
And Deer Hunter, Apocalypse Now, or Full Metal, right? And in these others, Rambo and the like, they're the lone,
the individual, right? And within Platoon and within Apocalypse Now and within Casualties of War and all of the other ones, what we're seeing there is inside that family unit, right? The platoon or whatever it might be, you've got kind of the gung-ho, individualistic, let's go fight this war and do it for the greatest generation kind of ideology, and you've got a kind of left-leaning or leftist interpretation of a more kind of pacifist version of the war, and those two are clashing within each other. And so you're getting this kind of microcosm of the United States, or at least political opinions about the war, being played out inside the war, and allowing us, I think, a moment to kind of consider our position, our being the American position on the war and what it does to soldiers, so that in some ways that we can forgive them as they're coming home into this space. But when we flip that into the 80s, right, and the films like Rambo and the Chuck Norris films.
Are you saying Rambo isn't getting us to question our positionality?
The first one, I would say, does.
Well,
right? Because he's a returning veteran.
It sets him up as, he's troubled. He's been
PTSD. He's got
and how does he react to this? Right, you did this to me. You know, it's kind of call out.
The government did this to me,
right.
And now, and that's the transition, right?
Yeah, then it's just, fuck it.
Yeah.
He's brought back. He has to do what's necessary, and he's going to do it.
Right. Man gone wild. I'm going to do it on my own, and I'm going to do it for the guys that got left behind or for those who got killed. Right. And that's, I think, that transition in the 1980s is reflective of the political culture. And I think, like you've said and written, right, it's a way of using Vietnam now as a stand-in for the wars that we were going to start prosecuting in South America or in Central America.
I would think so. And I would say prosecuting, because we're not really there, but we or at least politically, at least by the political class that's in charge, feels it's necessary to prosecute those in some ways. And we see that clearly through the Iran-Contra affair. That doesn't become news until 86, I believe.
Right, about the same time that these games are coming out, right? Yeah,
but the ideas in 82, 83, 84, 85 are all out there. People know we have military aids in the region, right? That we have put mines in the harbors in Nicaragua, right? That we're involved there, and Reagan is obviously a willing participant in that. And this is a lot of these games where they're, I looked at Viper or whatever, you're
codename Viper.
Codename Viper, you're going into South America to rescue a commando.
Right.
You're a commando to get a commando.
Commando to get a commando. Yes, we're going to pile commandos into the jungle, and everybody's going to,
but they're all in there. And whether you understood the political implications of the vernacular of Commando at the time, the idea of the lone commando doing something, I think would have resonated, would have made sense.
Oh yeah, I mean, it would have to have, because it was
social history at the time.
Right.
Even to a 12-year-old or 15-year-old might not understand it, but the words were there, right?
Right, and it's in the cultural zeitgeist, right? I mean, this is the same period, and we're not even taught that you've got the other set of Cold War films that are coming out, right? Where small town USA is being invaded by a Soviet counterforce,
that happens.
Right.
Red Dawn.
Red Dawn, Invasion USA.
Wait, wasn't Patrick Swayze in that?
In Red Dawn, yeah, he was the leader of the Wolverines.
Yeah, that's
Come
on. Sometimes I got to think back.
But Invasion USA, that's the Chuck Norris film that deals with the same kind of thing. There's another one with C. Thomas Howell and oh God, what was the name? Small Town USA or something like that.
Something like that.
Where again, same kind of and so for anybody growing up, especially for teenagers growing up at the time, right? I mean, you were growing up under
you and I,
the constant threat of possibility of nuclear holocaust, right? Or at least the way in which the world was perceived. When I mention that
to my students, they don't I had a real sort of general fear of that.
Oh yeah,
it was pervasive,
right?
As an undertone, like a little seismic thing that was just always there,
which led to this kind of nihilism for our generation, right? Where it was just like, who cares? We may not be here in a week or right.
So Wills makes it's when they were making Missile Command, right?
Right.
which comes out in the era of war games or just before that, right? So their intent was to show how nuclear war was a zero-sum game.
Right.
And originally they had them named the United States and the Soviet Union, but then they changed them to what it is, Zargon and something else.
To the alien forces.
To the alien forces, right. Even though it really is a game about Earth and nuclear war.
Right. Right. And
my point in that is that that's there, reverberates.
Right. And it's a kind of culturally accepted moment, right? And then layered on top of that is the beginnings of the Iran-Contra scandals, Ollie North, the wars in Panama, and our supporting of Noriega. Yeah. And there's I think in some ways there's this notion of kind of spiraling out of control and not being able to control one's life, maybe, where these video games become maybe a surrogate to finding some control in that uncertainty, and giving us an opportunity to kind of play at solutions to what are these larger cultural problems.
Yeah, I think, again, Missile Command is definitely like one for sure that does this. Even if the kids who are playing it didn't necessarily understand it, the tension there was there, right? And so you don't maybe take away the sort of thesis of the game, and maybe, but what you take away is something that you don't even associate with the larger world, but it's there.
Right.
And in Commando, I mean, you play these games, you are the dude who's going to do it. Maybe you don't think of yourself as a commando who's going out to stop communism or the threat from the enemy or whatever it is. Though in some ways you would, because the idea of the tension of communism in the United States was so large. You have the 80 Olympics, boycotted the 84 Olympics, reciprocally boycotted by the Soviet Union. I remember even going back, telling my students this growing up, the Olympics were great in the 80s because I always knew who to root for. You root for the Western European teams and not the Eastern European. So it wasn't just the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
No, it was West versus East. Yeah.
It was West versus the Iron Curtain.
Right.
And most kids would have had this kind of ingrained in them at some level, right?
Right. If it wasn't from the WWF and the Iron Sheik, and it was from Rocky fighting Draco and seeing Apollo Creed get spoilers for an old movie, but seeing Apollo Creed get killed by this Russian machine that was created to destroy America, right?
Yeah, and they're like Mike Hammer novels again. Like the Russians are just machines; they don't know what they're doing. They're just robots, right? And we're feeling objects with thoughtful prognosis on the situation.
Nature wins, man.
Right. The gut wins.
The gut wins.
Well, in some ways, that's what it's. It's
that's a
not to be too explicit.
A rough take, But so these games gave an outlet to, I think, a lot of that fear and frustration that was bubbling up in the varieties of pop culture, from The Day After, the movie that scared the shit out of both the nation and everybody or that kind of, even something like War Games, where Matthew Broderick is this kind of techno nerd, masculine techno nerd, who uses those kind of computer skills, to buck the system, to kind of stick it to the government, the man, whoever you want to claim it, and ultimately win the day. He's doing that in this kind of lone wolf style as well.
Yes, convince everybody.
Giving us...
And cut through the tape and cut through the FBI and
all the bureaucracies that are going to just lead us to, some nuclear annihilation. Or I think of like The Last Starfighter,
Yeah.
right, which is really a reference to video games and training for war and ultimately the destruction of an evil space force, which
you have to be the best at the video game for the aliens to come and get you.
Right. But again, it's this militaristic individual, right? It's not rugged. I guess it is rugged individualism still, but it's wrapped in a militarism and an exceptionalism against the kind of Soviet communist threat, right? That's popping up in South America, in our relationship with the Soviet Union, with Gorbachev and Reagan throwing insults back and forth, right? And there's that. I think there really is that, going back to what we were talking about earlier, that cowboy sensibility that gets played out, and these games allowed you to, and Commando specifically does, right? You are on your own against a horde of enemies,
innumerable odds
that is going to crush you, and there's no reason why you should be able to survive this except for your skill with the controller and right, and your that transference of kind of weird commando masculinity to player in that notion, in that idea,
right? Which does mean that cheat codes are emasculated.
Oh, are they?
Well, if I'm going to take off from your last comment, then yes.
Don't they just allow us to win at any cost?
Well, it's like players speed running Home Again.
Yes, that's just no reason to do that. But yeah, so I mean, this game I think it really is reflective of a much larger kind of pop culture of that time. And it seems to be, and we've talked a little bit about this before, a kind of transitionary game, right? Partly because it was an arcade port, I think, and they weren't going to necessarily change the graphics or the narrative form. They just wanted to make it familiar to players, right? And so we are in a nondescript space that we have to imagine as these other places. And we have a character in the game who reads more, I think you said this in a text conversation we were having about the game, but he reads more British World War II Commando style.
It's some
right
fashion,
in the game, in gameplay, right? Not on the
gameplay.
box art, not in the manuals, but at least within the game, he reads World War II.
And I think that's even where NES is being ambiguous, right? They're just putting up with kind of, it's a mashup in that sense, right? And it doesn't really matter. Whereas when we later will play Gunsmoke,
right,
they're able to use tropes more fluidly, and the gameplay is very similar. It's a top-down scroller. Like these are winning games, like,
right? But the Western trope is, I think it's a much easier, clean-cut trope to integrate into a game narrative.
Oh yeah, for sure. You stick a cactus in a desert and you're
and put a gun and a cowboy hat on somebody, and
it's
defined.
You don't have to do much more,
right? No. And there's a built-in narrative arc there, or there's a built-in narrative for the player, right? Who brings that prior knowledge into the game. With a game like Commando, right, especially at the time it's coming out, we've got all of these kind of cultural references. We've got Vietnam. We're still, I think, in some ways, our grandparents are still there. We're still celebrating World War II. We've recognized them in the 1980s, kind of, especially in the Reagan era, as the greatest generation. Right, as that kind of silent exceptionalist American force that brought good to the world. Right. So and I think, we're still kind of dealing with that. We're dealing with the loss in Vietnam. We're dealing with the rising communist threat and the pressures in South America. And so you get, these games really are in an ambiguous state, and I think they could mean or be read in all of those ways, right? You could read Commando as a straight World War II shoot 'em up. You could read it, but except for the POW part, which,
Yeah, the
right?
POWs and the huts, and I
Yeah,
mean, there's these references. Yeah, it's transitory. It's transitory game wise,
right,
and sort of how it's picking up on cultural references and laying them into the game.
right. And the narrative
Um,
structure in later games
becomes
overlays
yeah,
geography, right? This
yeah.
game doesn't give us geography. You
No,
know, even in the cutscenes
there's no.
between levels, there's no sense of where you are. It's just you're constantly becoming, as player, your avatar is just becoming more and more bedraggled because you've
Yeah,
given more and more of your life to
force.
this cause, right? Until the
Yeah,
very end, where it just says, "Congratulations, all of your missions are complete. Missions completed." With a heart, right, in a bad translation of the English, and that's it. That's how it ends, right? And it just says you were a good soldier, and
well, what
that's
more
it.
do you need if you're doing it,
Right,
right?
and
You
you've done your job, you've saved
done your
everybody,
job.
and you return home. Um, and in the later games, we get a lot of that kind of A-team style scrolling text with a
That's like
machine gun kind
Viper.
of noise that tells us you are a commando in Central America
Yeah,
sent to find, right, this kidnapped person, or you are in Vietnam, right? The Rambo game series tells us specifically who we are, what we're doing. And in this game, we don't get that. And
no,
so
you're just dropped in.
yeah,
You have to deal with it.
and you can make whatever story you want with this one, I think, in some ways. And when you look at it from a distance, right, it's easy to see this as just a kind of simple World War II shooter,
Well,
right?
this is what happens when our students take our class,
Yeah,
and they say, "I will never play video
games
games."
again.
But I have
Yeah,
conversations with them. I still have fun playing
yeah,
games. They're and the difference is, they're fun games to play. This is one of them, and they're good games to play. Good games are games that I would say, bring in an appropriate historical arc, have empathy, or diverse things like this.
hmm.
Um, Being fun doesn't mean good.
Not always,
This
no.
one though is this one being so ambiguous, it could be many things,
Many things,
right?
yeah, and it is fun.
Yeah,
It was a well received game. It's a fun game to play. I'll probably go back to it to see if I can finish it without the cheat code.
yeah, well,
Um,
right.
right. I mean,
Just,
it's a
just
relatively
go,
short
move on to
game.
Gunsmoke.
Yeah, but this is a relatively short
Yeah,
game, right? I mean,
it's 16,
it's
16
16-ish
stages.
levels,
Yeah,
and you're looking at maybe if you play it kind of run and gun straight through, and can survive, it's no more than an hour, 2 hours.
yeah,
If once you
probably.
kind of fall
But
into the
it,
patterns to finish it, if you play it with the cheat code on, you can finish it in 20 minutes.
yeah, which
Um,
is yeah,
right,
yeah. Well,
half hour or so,
yeah,
which is something, right? So
yeah. Well, I think we've done a pretty good job here. I
of
think I hope
dissecting
being
this,
our what's that?
we've done a pretty good job of dissecting this and thinking about it.
Yeah, I
And
think I have. I mean, I think part of what we're doing is to for us to get us to think about these games, to have other people think about these games as proper cultural documents, and
right,
how to situate them and contextualize them, and not just leave them by the wayside,
right,
or just think of them as a game. Yes, they are a game. Everything is a thing, but they're from a moment. They're from a time. They're imbued
in
with those things
those
from time.
meanings, yeah, exactly,
Yeah, the social, political, economic
right,
forces. They're not just technological implements,
right,
right? Though they are that, and they are attached to our TVs. We could have a whole discussion about that,
right,
and Sean has written on sort of stuff about the way the rooms and place makes meaning of
these,
how we imagine ourselves and
these
who's
games
playing these
themselves,
games.
and yeah.
Yeah. And so we
It's
hope, you can, if you have any comments, you can leave them with us.
right.
We love dialogue. We love talking. If you have any suggestions for games, we have a list of history video games. Right now, we're just doing the NES, and we
Right.
probably won't do all of them because we've got like 70, 80 games listed, and we might start bringing them together and mashing some together in categories. But
There's a
any
list
suggestions?
on criticalplay.org.
Is
There's
it
a list in the blog
okay?
section of the games we're intending on playing, and that we'll work through. This really is just a series for us to kind of think about stuff out loud. We will, for each of the games that we're kind of playing, talking about, and thinking about, have a small written piece on Critical Play as well, that kind of is a companion where we can put these thoughts together in a little bit more cohesive way as we do this. This is a new series for us, and we're just trying to get some things out there.
If you took the time to watch and listen, we appreciate it.
Yep.
And drop us a line at Critical Play,
Right.
or visit our blog, which has our other series, Historians React, and some pieces that Sean and I have written either together or separately on a variety of different history of games or representation of games. And if you're at CSULB, I know we probably won't be meeting there physically, but drop us a line if you're interested in any of our classes,
Right.
or have any ideas. Yeah.
Okay.